I once ran into a young woman who told me, she said, she was in foster care. So she was going from home to home, and she said, we only got sometimes all her things were in a trash bag. And she said, someone had given her a birth ice memoir, and she said, it went with me to every home.
Wow.
And she said, and every time I would get there, I would reread it and it would anchor me. Things like that. I mean, that's the thing. In the beginning, you read this, the proverb, parole gen pied, parole gen zèle, words have wings, words have feet, And so, and sometimes they have so much, just beyond one's expectation. Because, I mean, initially, what I was doing was writing something for myself, like writing something that I needed, as a 15-year-old in America who's just kind of looking for like interpretations of myself. So sometimes you sort of like, the bomb is yours, like you're just writing this thing to heal you, and then it reaches out to other people.
This is Salam and Hello, where stories of joy and justice vibrate with the rhythm of Africa and the diaspora.
We're worried, anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then we say, hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to.
Happy New Year, everyone. It is 2024. We welcome you with lots of love and joy as we welcome in the new year. To kick off our episodes for this year, we are honored to have the prolific author Edwidge Danticat with us today. We recorded this episode at the end of 2023, and we are so delighted that she is kicking off this year for us with her wisdom, her insight, and the beautiful passages from her incredible library of fiction, short stories, memoir. She has done it all. So welcome to the year. Welcome to a new episode with the one and only Edwidge Danticat. Salam and hello, everyone. My name is Lilly Piper, and today I am just beyond thrilled to welcome a very, very special guest. Let me read some of her prolific writing to you. Listen before it passes. Parole gen pied, parole gen zèle. The words can give wings to your feet. There is so much to say, but time has failed you, she said. There is a place where women are buried in clothes the color of flames, where we drop coffee on the ground for those who went ahead, where the daughter is never fully a woman until her mother has passed on before her. There is always a place where if you listen closely in the night, you will hear your mother telling a story, and at the end of the tale, she will ask you this question: Oui, libérée? Are you free, my daughter? My grandmother quickly pressed her fingers over my lips. Now, she said, you will know how to answer. These are the beautiful words of my special guest today. Edwidge Danticat is one of our greatest writers of the 21st century. If you know her work, you have enjoyed the way she has spun tales of fiction, nonfiction, short stories, stories for young readers, stories for people like myself, stories for her people in Haiti and for all of us in the diaspora. Edwidge has been one of those writers whose words captivate you and trouble you and cause your imagination to go further than you anticipated. Let me tell you a little bit more about the ways that the world has recognized her work. She's the author of several books. What I read from you just now was from Breath, Eyes, and Memory, which she wrote at the tender age of 25 and became a national bestseller when it appeared on the Oprah Book Club. She's also an author of Crick Crack, a National Book Award finalist, The Farming of Bones, The Dew Breaker, Brother, I'm Dying, which might be my favorite, Create Dangerously, Claire of the Sea Light, The Art of Death, and so on. Her most recent novel, Everything Inside, which is a collection actually of short stories, not a novel, but a collection of short stories, is a National Book Critics Circles Award winner. She's also the editor of The Butterfly's Way, Voices of the Haitian Diaspora in the United States, Best American Essays 2011, IAT Noir, and IAT Noir 2. She has written, like I said, for people of all ages, and she's captured our attention, and the world has taken note, honoring her as a 2007 finalist for the National Book Award for Brother Angayi, a 2008 winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography as well. She's also a 2009 MacArthur Fellow, a 2018 Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellow, a United States Artist Fellow, a two-time winner of the Story Prize, and a 2018, this is the word I will not be able to pronounce correctly, Neustadt International Prize, and the 2019 St. Louis Literary Award. Earlier this year, she was also given the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Penn Malamud Prize. And when they wrote about her work and her contributions to literature, this is what was said about Edwidge. She is a once-in-a-generation writer, one who changes the landscape of fiction by crafting stories that exalt the human experience into the realm of the mythic. So salam and hello, listeners. It is just my great pleasure and honor to welcome Edwidge to the show today. Karibu Sana, we are so happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, Edwidge, I was first introduced to your work by your fellow Haitian scholar and brilliant writer, Regine Jean-Charles, my dear, dear friend, who brought one of your books to me back in the early 2000s. Since that time, I have continued to read and love your work, and I have a daughter who loves your work. And so I cannot wait to just learn more about your craft and your work and the tremendous impact you've had on literature and the nonfiction world. So let me start with an easier question here. Those of us here in East Africa, we have roots to the entire diaspora. But for those who maybe don't know your work as well, Edwidge, how do you introduce yourself when you enter a room of new people for the first time?
Well, I usually just say, I'm Edwidge. And then being sort of an introvert, you kind of let it, and then I ask people questions about themselves. That's usually that's my cocktail party strategy. But if pressed, I would say I'm a writer. I'm also a mom. I'm a wife. I'm a sister. I'm a friend. And my friend Eugene certainly is responsible for a lot of my book sales. I keep meeting people who are connected to her. I told her when we were talking about this, I said, everybody, likon tout moun, as we would say in Creole. But yes, I mean, those are really like the centers of my life, but writing has always been a part of it. And initially through storytelling. And so I was born in Haiti, and when I was 2, my dad moved to the US. And when I was 4, my mom joined him, and I spent 8 years with my aunt and uncle in a house, full of kids. And when I was 12, my parents, who were undocumented in the US, and were finally able to get their papers and sent for us. So I joined them when I was 12, my brother and I, and they had 2, my 2 younger brothers who were born in the States. So we tried to, re-merge this family that had been separated. And when I got here in this new land, like writing and reading and just thinking back to the stories that I was told really was a lifeline for me. So that's really the trajectory, a little bit of the trajectory of my life, and also through writing.
So I'm curious to know, if you don't mind, when you were reunited as a family, when you look back to that time, what role did stories play as you got to know your new brothers, as you got to know a new country?
Yes, stories, I think, filled in this absence too, because I just keep thinking back to my parents. Just their absence was felt differently because, for example, every Sunday we had a standing appointment to go to this phone booth downtown in downtown Port-au-Prince because we didn't have a phone at home. There were no cell phones at that time. So every Sunday afternoon after church for them, after church for us, we would walk downtown with my uncle and talk to them for about 15 very expensive minutes. And my mom, I remember would just try to tell us, she tried to be very like routine about it. Like, this is what I'm doing. This is, what are you doing? And, and now realizing the sort of how brief that conversation needed to be. And then people in my life, told me these stories. My aunts told me stories. My uncle told me stories they were told. And then you were supposed to always extract a lesson from it. And because we were, our parents were not with us, often there were a lot of stories about absent mothers, for example. And then I realized as an adult that I was being told these stories as a kind of comfort, because sometimes you feel like when you're told certain stories that you're being given a cultural gift, right? You don't see it as a personal gift. So you're like, oh, this is part of my heritage. This is, it is that too. But I realize as I've gotten older, especially when my parents passed away, that a lot of those stories were supposed to give you guides, like hints about how to live your life and a lot of those stories also, especially the Haitian stories, assume that it was going to be a difficult life. And these were going to be your tools to help get you through that life. In the same way that, religious people are giving, biblical verses, you're given these stories also as kinds of, points of light or points of guidance in your life.
Yeah. That's really such a legacy that they've left you, and now you're leaving through your tremendous body of work. When you think about some of your early works in particular, or even what you've written for younger readers, what for you is the tie between those early stories maybe that your parents were telling you and then the first evidence of those stories in your written work?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I think there was a moment when I was about 4 where I understood that stories could be also written. And so I was told all these stories and it was really like the way adults told them. This was the only time they were really lively. They seemed like they were having fun. And I thought, oh, there's a kind of magic in that, because these very stern people are suddenly happy, like when they're doing this task, when they're telling these stories at night, and, it's like a lively thing. And sometimes, they would tell them at wakes, the night before a funeral. And that was really confusing to me when I was a kid, about sort of how happy people were at wakes. And then the next morning they were like writhing on the floor, I mean, but eventually it showed, I think, just how we mourn, right? Like how you celebrate your life is also part of mourning. And then when I was 4, my uncle gave me a book, Madeline, about a little girl in a house in Paris that was covered with vines, and these, with these nuns, and I know my young mind even then thought, oh, my uncle and aunt are like the nuns with all these kids whose parents you don't know where they are, and they're just as strict. And we had these rows of beds, the same thing. And I think this was the first time that I felt like my world can reach out to these other worlds, that there were other people living similar lives like me who didn't look like me.
Yeah.
And then I realized, oh, I was able to know that because I'm sitting here alone with this book. And I realized the power of that, oh, because I was shy, I never could imagine myself like the head of one of those storytelling sessions. But I was reading this book and I thought, oh, that is really fascinating, because this person doesn't have to be here to tell me the story, and I can take it with me and I can be alone with it, that alone part, because that was also a rare commodity in a big house with a bunch of people, like that, to be alone. So I could go like to the roof of my, my uncle's house and sit there with this book by myself. To me, that felt like the height of luxury. And then I realized, I was like, I don't know how this thing is done, but I want to do that. Like, I don't want to do the thing where you stand in front of people. I want to do the one where you like put the words on the paper. And really that's for me when I started making that transfers and because of being exposed to the stories at around the same period of time, gave them equal power to me. But I just felt like, oh, this is this one that if I'm reading right, I can do. You know.
I love what you've said about these stories being, a map, a pathway, almost a passport at times to different worlds, but also to connect you to your family. And I'm an Ethiopian immigrant myself, and coming to the US, you're unearthing memories for me of what it felt like to get away with a book, because aunt and uncle had, this room, cousins had that room, brother and sister. So we were a big household like you, fighting for air, but books became this haven. I appreciate you sharing that with me, because it's just unearthing for me my own affinity for books, and not realizing that maybe that's exactly what they were doing for me, is creating other worlds. So when you go to pen some of your stories, I'm curious, at what point do you know whether that idea is going to be a short story? Is it going to be, for young readers? Is it going to be for a novel? At what point in the idea, when the ideas start twirling in your mind or your pen starts to move, do you know what direction your story is going to take?
It's really, I let the story guide me, because some stories just come with one line. And some stories just come with one image. I remember, for example, with Claire of the Sea Light, and I had watched this documentary about children in Haiti who are orphaned, but are not really orphaned. They are in orphanages, but sometimes their parents walk them over to the orphanage because it's sort of this Faustian bargain they make. They're like, I can't, to give my child a better life, I'll give them away. Just like my parents are like, we'll leave my child behind so I can, for a better future. And so I just remember like watching this documentary and with these people who had adopted some kids from Haiti, and then they were saying, oh, they give their kids away. I mean, not so mean, but it's like, oh, but it's just like, it's simpler for them. And I just realized, and I had just become a parent myself, and I knew the heart-wrenching, and I was like, and I went to bed that night and this little girl showed up, like I just had this dream about this young girl, Claire of the Sea, like with her phone that came up. And sometimes it's one line comes up and you just follow that thread. And I never know. I mean, the novel for me is a rare beast. I never sit down and assume I'm going to write a novel, because I tend to be shorter in terms of like, I'm more economical and probably because I have a very short attention span. And so I never think, oh, I'm going to write this epic book. And I love I'm love and envious of my friends who can do that. So I always assume it's going to be on the shorter side, and then it expands. So that's usually, and maybe it's from sort of this background of consuming stories like that initially. So for example, The Farming of Bones started with a story, 1937 in Creek Crack. And I thought and that one just wouldn't leave me. And then I went deeper and deeper into the research. And, but I think letting the story tell you what it wants to be, has usually worked for me. And I try not to force it, and everything inside that story, 7 stories, was almost novel length. And then at some point I realized, I'm just, not much is happening in this story. I just like these people. I just like this world, I'm like, I want to hang out with them. And I'm just writing this to hang out with them. And so then that one got, that was a much longer story that just got shrunk into that, to its essence. So sometimes that happens too, where you have something longer, then it's like, oh, this is not meant to be this long. And then it goes shorter.
Well, and so speaking of these longer novels, let's talk a little bit about Brother, I'm Dying, if you don't mind. Such a personal and powerful story. And as I've read your own commentary about the book and the events that informed it, did a longer book just fit because it was indeed an epic story of years and of circumstances that really some of the most significant people in your lives are featured in that book. Tell us just about how that book came to be and maybe what you were feeling as you wrote it, because the details are heartbreaking.
Yes, so Brother I'm Dying is about this year that I had, 2004, 2005, where my uncle died in immigration custody in the US. My uncle who raised me, who I've been talking about indirectly a little bit. And my father was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis. And my daughter was born, and all of that in that year. And it's interesting because I've never, of all the time that I've never written a book that quickly with a newborn at at home too. And I think part of that came out of the urgency of that story. So, after my uncle passed away, we were given, so he was, for a little bit more detailed, the UN was in Haiti at that time, and they were they came to his neighborhood, which is very, my neighborhood too, which is a very political neighborhood, but, political in the sense of that they rallied around causes. They were rallied around the then first democratically elected President Javier Aristide, who had, been disposed in a coup d'etat. And they just, it was just a really vibrant neighborhood. There were a lot of marches there. And so then the UN came that day. They climbed on top of my uncle's church to shoot at some armed groups that were starting to grow and it's actually proliferated since then in the area. And they shot and killed some people. And then after they withdrew, some neighbors came. They thought my uncle had given permission, and then he had a visa and he had been coming to the U.S. for decades, and then he came. And then when he got here, he said he requested asylum. He was 81 years old. He was detained. His medication was taken away, and he died chained to a hospital bed. So that was the story. And then so when he passed away, my uncle and I went and got his, we went to get his body for burial, and they gave us his suitcase. And in his suitcase, there were he had kept these notes, sort of like shorthand notes about along the way from the time, and he had a list of things he had lost. And then he also had a copy of his immigration interview and of some, just a few pages of his, some medical things. And so when I got that, I thought, oh my gosh, my uncle had always talked about, people in my family always either said, are you writing about me or don't write about me? It's usually that's the perimeter. And so my uncle was always like, when are you going to write about me? And so when I got his briefcase, I thought, this is the time, and I'm going to write this because he can't, and there was such a moment of circularity in my family. So that book was very personal in the sense, I always say to people, I feel, and I'm glad it's your favorite, because I always say that, I feel like if I got one, if there was some kind of deal to be made and there's you get one, this would be the one, because it'll be important to my children and the young people in my family. Just last night, two of my nieces were over, and sometimes, it's strange to be at this age now. I'm 54. Where young people, teenagers, are talking about events in your life they happened in the Middle Ages.
History now, it's history.
Yes, they'll say, "Oh yes, I heard this," and and my one of my nieces, Zoe, was saying, "Oh yes, I heard this, that one of our uncles," and I said, "Well, it's in Brother I'm Dying. You're old enough to read it now," and so. I feel like for me, that's the weight of that book, just for my family. And because there's a lot of family history there. And to a certain extent, everything that I was told by my father and my uncle about our family history is in that book. So it's a very close to my heart.
Which to me just speaks to both the power of your work and how important stories remain, because so much of our histories have not been, or we don't have as easy or quick access to some of our histories as we should. They've been documented in ways that are not yet publicly accessible in the ways that we hope. And so works like Brother, I'm Dying, I'm sure for even other Haitians, is a source of history for them and a source of information and understanding. And what do you hear from your fellow Haitians in the diaspora or at home about what your works have meant to them and what they take from your work?
Well, I mean, it's, the work, for me, it's always moving. Certain encounters that I have about specific works at times, right? And I once ran into a young woman who told me, she said, she was in foster care. So she was going from home to home, and she said, we only got sometimes her things were in a trash bag. And she said, someone had given her a birth-eyes memoir, and she said, it went with me to every home.
Wow.
And she said, and every time I would get there, I would reread it and it would anchor me, things like that. I mean, that's the thing. In the beginning, you read this, the proverb, parole ge pied, parole ge zèle, words have wings, words have feet, And so, and sometimes they have so much, just beyond one's expectation, because I mean, initially, what I was doing was writing something for myself, like writing something that I needed, as a 15-year-old in America who's just kind of looking for like interpretations of myself. So sometimes you sort of like, the bomb is like you're just writing this thing to heal you, and then it reaches out to other people. So not that it's always been great, and that's exactly how it should be. There's also been some pushback, especially with breath-eyes memory, because of the issue of, the virginity testing. And I think, I think sometimes less so now, because we have so many voices of young, women of color, Black women in the diaspora, of the entire diaspora, and who are, so, but back then, like almost 30 years ago, there were fewer of us. And so it's like, if it was kind of like you were supposed to like just tell the good stories, like don't make us look bad, don't tell stories out of school. So I think a lot of people wrestled with that, and I completely understand this idea of representation, right? And so that's why, for me, it's always been important to also like edit works, like bring in other voices, because I think the more we hear from people from the same group of people, the more like this sort of like this only one thing, we can dissipate that, and people can just see, oh yes, I'm part of a tradition. There are a lot of other people walking this path with me, not all of them in English. And I think that's very important for people to also know, like beyond me, that there's this whole huge literature that stands behind me, that I, on people whose shoulders I stand on, and there's the flood coming ahead of me.
Oh, I love that. I love that, the flood coming ahead of you, which certainly you have helped pave the way for. I mean, the breadth of your work, I think, in particular because you've written so many short stories that are lengthy, they stand alone, and they each one on their own carve out a new idea, a new imagination, a new experience for us as readers. So I'm curious, when you finish a work and you may go back after the editing that you just mentioned and go back to read it again, what are you looking for to know that story now is finished? How do you know that it's ready to go out into the world?
Yeah, well, I've been lucky with the short stories that I always feel like so happy that I get another shot, like before they go into the book. And often, for those folks who are listening who are writers, sometimes the difference between, a okay story and a really good story is time, and having some time to put it away and then coming back, with new eyes, which, sometimes in the type, the sort of the way we live now feels really like indulgent, and, you need patience for that. But often, I know it's finished for me in the first instance when I keep going back, like I'm putting the same thing in that I'm taking out. I'm putting this thing in, I'm putting it out. Then I'm like, okay, maybe it's done. And I think, in there are moments you just have to walk away, and you're like, this is the most I can do. This is the best I can do right now. And so, but every time when we do the collection, so for everything inside, a lot of the stories were published earlier in different versions. And then with time and with the, merging of all these stories, of course, there are things that in one story will enrich the other story, right? If someone reads the first one and when they get to the last one, they've sort of been building. So I revise constantly, and but a lot of my revision, like the revision that I'm most pleased about, is late when I get a chance to add layers to something. So you're like, wow, I didn't know this when I began, and then at the end I learned this, and then you go back and you sort of layer that in, you sort of like move that in. And the short story is wonderful for that in a way that is harder in a novel, because in a novel you're negotiating a lot more. But I've started writing, so I did just finish a novel, and yes, I'm very excited. But it's and one of the things that helped, I realized after writing sort of and I told myself, I was like, I want it to be like a real novel, like linear in this sense, like it goes from this happens, not in a boring way, but what I did that helped me in terms of imagining completion was to write it scene by scene. So I literally went scene 1, and then I wrote the scene 2, and that helped me organize in a way, because I tend to sort of go like like my mind tends to wander, and that was a really good practice. And it's, I think it's important also for people to know that no matter how long we've been doing this, I remember, Maya Angelou saying, she used to go into a hotel room with her yellow pads, and she's like, no matter how many you've written, when you go into that hotel room with your yellow pad, it's still blank.
Yes.
Right. And you have to relearn that, that practice over and over again.
I think you've inspired probably many budding authors. I'm thinking about one of my dear friends who is a fan of your work, who will be listening to this and has just finished her first novel, will be encouraged by your words, that even Edwidge has a process that requires patience and time and reflection. It's a daunting task, but I am thrilled to hear that you have a novel coming to us soon. That makes me very excited for that. And I want to talk about Haiti. I mean, you have honored and shown your love and deep affection for your country, your people. You've told stories of the diaspora. You've taken us right back home and helped us to feel what it's like to be there. And I'm wondering, over the years, as different political movements have happened in Haiti, or there's been natural disasters, they've broken all of our hearts. Those of us who are outside of Haiti, who are not Haitian, who watch that and grieve and mourn with you. As a writer, how does that feel, and how do you process at times the grief that you might be experiencing as Haiti has hit tough times at different moments?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of the things that, our mutual friend Regine, Professor Jean-Charles, we talk about often, is that I think what makes one do this work is in part like a kind of, being like like so empathetic in a way, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not saying, oh, I'm so empathetic, but I think part of being any kind of artist is being able to feel beyond your own life in this deep way that you then try to convey. So that makes current events extremely painful at times, especially concerning Haiti, right? And still have a lot of family in Haiti, and a lot of young people in my family who are constantly, we're constantly in touch, and and who are really directly affected by events that they recount differently than when I was, talking to my parents once a week, that they recount in real time. So sometimes they will just all the details, like all the images, all the pictures, all the stories, you'll have, young women and they're like, oh my gosh, the guys are going by with the guns in front of the house, or they'll send you recordings of gunshots, or, they also, will send you clips from conferences they go to, graduations, parties, pool, it's like all these mixture of things that you are living with them in a way that's very different than when I was there. So I live it just. I mean, I also live with. I live in a multi-generational house. My 86-year-old mother-in-law lives with us. So that means in any Haitian household, a lot of YouTube watching of Haiti commentators. Yes. So it's kind of like in real time, you're like, the things that get circulated on WhatsApp, and you're living not like being there, but having friends, young friends who have chosen to stay, who are professionals, who work in media, who work in the arts, too, artists, folks who are just, folks in the countryside, we know so a whole range of people who are there. That is just, it's like my heart is always there. And so one way that I process is just through the work. And then to contribute in whatever other ways that I can.
Well, it's interesting that there's so many ties. I think there's a shared experience, I think, for many of us in the diaspora who have left home. My parents left Ethiopia because of the communist revolution, and when I was just a kid, and different circumstances than when you left or when your parents left. But there are themes that run throughout your work that have made me feel at home when I read your work, where it makes me feel seen and understood, and even gives me language and understanding for my experience, and in particular in everything inside, perhaps because it's more a recent work. I don't know, some of those stories about the way that immigrants were, this pull back and forth between home and, the US or Miami, wherever they were at the time, and the particular stories really felt very tangible to me. I felt the tension. It was almost uncomfortable to read because I felt like at times, what does Edwidge want me to do? Is she trying to tell me to do something here, that I should be doing more? Should I be sending more home? Should I go back? And so when your readers in particular who have left Haiti, who are finding themselves anywhere in the world, building lives and families and the next chapter of maybe Haiti's story, what do you want the diaspora in particular to take from your work that might be a little bit different than your readers back home?
Well, I think, for the diaspora, the story is born out of diaspora, right? And one of the things that, for example, when Breath Eyes Memoir was published, folks would say, well, is this Haitian literature? Is this American literature? And I thought, it's in the middle. It's sort of on that hyphen, as Julio Alvarez said, right? That this hyphen is the island, right? That is the diaspora life, where So for me, always, I hope that people empathy, really. I hope, and that's what literature does best. I hope that you read this, and as thankfully said, you're able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. You put yourself in somebody else's life. That's what literature does best, because I sometimes read a book where I feel like, oh, I know this character much better than I know anybody in my life, you know? And that's such a beautiful thing that you could that you could get on, into someone else's skin in that way. And I don't have any illusion that that changes the world necessarily, but I think that at least reduces sort of these gaps between people, that you'd be like, oh, I think I know this a little bit. And then hopefully that encourages you to go out and read more, go out and learn more, pay a little more attention. And then, if an opportunity comes, advocate if necessary for that cause. And then that's, when I was a teenager reading, I would read Amy Tan. I read the Gerlach Club, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's like my mother. Those are like my aunts, and then I read Paul Marshall, and I was like, that's definitely them, And so there's these things that sometimes, that literature just really brings to light things that we may not have realized we had in common, bonds we didn't know we had. And certainly even, I think people in the diaspora even were still surprised by like, oh my, you play this game too? Or you're like, even though we know we're sort of like, we have this common heritage, various though it be, but it still surprises us that sometimes that there are things that we share, and on a very granular level sometimes.
Well, even the title of Crick Crack, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. Do I understand it that it's kind of like a call and response, isn't it? About, is it like, tell me a story?
Yes, yeah. It's like tell me, it's like Crick Crack, and then it follows sometimes with, other variations, but it's really call and response. Yes, absolutely.
Because we have the same thing here in Kenya, Hadithi and Joe, same thing, tell me a story. Then in Ethiopia, we have another one, Teret Teret, Tilambaret. So it's exactly what you said. There are these echoes of our shared cultures across tens of thousands of miles. And it is quite a beautiful and powerful thing when we recognize ourselves in your work and your words. And I thank you for that. I think for my family, for my eldest daughter, it's really, your work has really been a way we connect and talk about life through your work. So I am so grateful for that, and for what it continues to give me personally, but of course it's given the world. So you recently this year were recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Pen Malamud Award. What does a prize like that signal to you when you start to get Lifetime Achievement Awards? Edwidge, how does that feel as a writer, and what does that signal to you?
Well, I mean, thankfully, there are some even younger people who've had it. And this one it's a Lifetime Achievement for the short story, which is such a special, and it's such a special genre for me, as we've been saying, that it meant a lot to get it. And in the comment, when they asked me to comment, and immediately I thought, for me, the short story is so aligned with how I learned stories, through storytelling in Haiti. So that was extra special. I mean, it's, for me, when I looked in the company of the folks who won this award, like Jhumpa Lahiri, just like really wonderful Lydia Davis, wonderful short story writers. It means a lot. It means a lot. And I love the form, and it meant a lot. And those things always, these kinds of awards are I always have to kind of pause and think, oh my goodness, just like I sat down and wrote one word, and then once it became a sentence, and became a story, then it became many stories. It's also when you're looking back, it's also a testament in a way to perseverance, and the sense of like, of course, nobody feels like doing this all the time. I love writing, but there are moments where it's not fun. And, but just trying to see something amorphous, out of like a big idea or something comes that other people read, and then just want to put in the company of these other wonderful creators. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. I don't know what else to say, but it's nice, I want to say.
Well, it's wonderful for all of us to be reminded of your contributions and how, as you said, you're in such good company with some of really the world's master storytellers. And even this interview for me has been such a great masterclass. I will re-listen to it with the ear as a creative of things that I can do to implement a practice of storytelling like you have outlined for us today. We put out to our readers that we were going to be interviewing you, not our readers. See, I've turned myself into a writer, our listeners. That we were going to be interviewing you, and we asked them to send in some questions. So let me take a moment and ask you a few of the questions from our listeners, because I love that they were a few of them very specific to specific works. So we had one reader ask us, what was the inspiration behind Little Guy's character from the story A Wall of Fire Rising in Crick Crack? Can you tell us a little about him?
Okay, so I'll just, for those who haven't read the story, A Wall of Fire Rising, it's about this family, and the young man gets a part in a play, and he plays Boukman, the Haitian revolutionary. So that there's a speech by Boukman that is given, when the Haitian revolutionary begins in Bois-Caïman in 1791. It's like, he speaks about God, and he says, we've worshipped our gods, now we're going to worship our own, and then we're going to just go fight. And so that was really that speech was the inspiration for Little Guy. And I thought, I remember when I was writing that story, thinking about this revolutionary moment and thinking just how, especially growing up in Haiti, you recite history, we do rote memorization. So you always have this like things that are always in your mind. En me renversant, and overthrowing me, Toussaint Louverture said, you've like overthrown the tree of liberty, but not its roots. I'm paraphrasing. But so you have these phrases that are always like Shakespeare to you, and the Boukman less so, but it was always there. And so Boukman's actually the actual speech, and thinking about how it might resonate in moments of contemporary struggle is what inspired that story.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm delighted to get that back story to him and his character. And I wish we had more time. I'm just noticing, for listeners, I apologize if you're feeling unsatisfied with the amount of time, but there's so many more questions, so I'm going to keep moving in the interest of time. But we had another person write in and ask, what inspires you about Queen Anacaona, who was a young adult story or young reader story that was many years ago. Yeah.
Yes, and Anacaona was, an indigenous ruler in Haiti, and so I remember just being intrigued by her, because apparently where she ruled was in Léogâne, which is where my family's from. And I remember being in Haiti one time and thinking, I want to write. I had just passed the Anacaona school in Léogâne, and then I was like, I should write about Anacaona. And then our car. My husband was driving, and then our car broke down in front of the Anacaona police station. So I said, I meant to write the story. And then I was a huge reader of the Scholastic Royal Diaries, and I wrote them. I pleaded to write this. I was like, I want to write about this indigenous, woman. And they said, well, they had no writings in their time. And they're like, we'll work around that, And so, that's just my love for the story. And she was, also, she was just an artist. She was a ruler, but she was an artist, and and then my friend Lilly had painted a gorgeous portrait of her that also guided me through through the whole writing of it.
I wish I had written this question, but I didn't. But this came in from a listener as well. And I just love the way they have framed so many of your works and the representation of women and how central they are as characters and how important they are as vehicles for other themes. So they wrote, you tie the political to the personal in your narratives. And oftentimes women's lives and relationships are a vehicle to explore perhaps a political situation. What is it about women's lives that make them a strong conduit for some of your political questions regarding the state of IAT or themes around restoration, family revolution, and so on, any of the numerous themes? And I just love that idea as women's lives and relationships as a vehicle for your themes and your novels. Would you agree with that statement? And if so, you know, how important are women to you in your writing?
Oh yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement. And women, you know, in Haiti, we say women are the potomitan, like the middle pillar. I mean, sometimes it's, you know, it's just kind of like, it has also this flip side of like the strong Black woman thing, and do we always have to be strong? But in a way, you know, women are certainly the potomitan of my writing, and for me, you know, they're women because I had all these surrogate mothers, and there were women in the society, you know, who didn't have much money, they didn't have, you know, social status, but they were in our lives, they were everything. And for me, like, and I would see that in so many places, in the countryside, in different parts of the city. Not that men were, you know, put aside, but also we'd had a dictatorship for 30 years that imprisoned so many men or enrolled them in these, you know, and they were enrolled them as henchmen for it. That women, especially the particular time that I was growing up, really played a really strong role in keeping the society together at the time where a lot of men were migrating or, you know, or being forced to the Dominican Republic to work in the sugarcane, or, you know, or in the prisons of the dictatorship. And for me, also, I think there's a way that the political follows through our lives, right? And it affects so much of the personal that women have always kind of held up for it with a lot of obstacles. You know, before I knew what feminism was, I knew a lot of feminists or womanists, like, and to Alice Walker's definition, I saw that in front of my eyes. We didn't have, you know, I didn't have the words for it, but I saw it in action. I saw it being lived. And so, yeah, that's really the lens that launched me into storytelling, for certainly. And then later on, I think, you know, as I got older, I started seeing more of my fathers and the men in my life and how they supported the women in their lives. But yeah, the women, yay.
We have enjoyed actually both characters, definitely from your writing, both the strength of men and women who make the communities and the families that you so beautifully portray in your work. So you've done them justice, both.
Yes, thank you.
I like middle pillar. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Well, I sadly, we've kind of run out of time, but not out of questions. So thankfully, we have a mutual friend who I can continue to, you know, pester to find my way back to you. But before we let you go, I have two last questions that we like to ask every guest who comes on our show, because we really recognize there is a through line throughout humanity, wherever we may be in the diaspora, on the continent, and beyond. So we ask two very simple questions. One, first, Edwidge, what is your favorite drink?
Oh, what is my favorite drink? I am boring with these types of questions.
You're allowed.
Okay, all right. I don't even drink that much, but I guess, what is my favorite drink?
And I should say daytime drinks too. Coffee is perfect.
Coffee, yes, coffee.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to bring you some Ethiopian coffee next time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes,
absolutely. Yes.
Ethiopian coffee is coming your way. And then lastly, we are a show that's all about joy and justice. And we really believe there's joy in justice, and justice brings joy to communities. So what's bringing you joy today?
Oh, what's bringing me joy today? So later today, I am interviewing Jhumpa Lahiri and at the Greenlight Bookstore in Brooklyn. And it's funny, I'm speaking to you from the campus at Columbia University, where I'm now teaching, and she's teaching at Barnard, where we both went.
Wow.
So that's also bringing me joy, and just like my children bring me joy, my family, I'm 54 now, and I'm at this point where I start echoing my mother, like, just waking up in the morning brings us healthy, and walking and okay is an occasion for celebration and joy. And being able to even think about justice and the possibility of contributing to justice in whatever way we can all do it,
Yes.
brings joy.
Thank you for that. That's really a powerful way to sum up a lifetime of work and beauty that you have added to all of our lives, Edwidge. I mean, this is just such a delight for me to have had this chance to talk to you. Thank you for your work, your contributions, your leadership, your voice. We look to you oftentimes to make sense of where we are, in political times, or in times of moments of where we feel disconnected from home, and your words often are that bridge for me and for so many. So thank you so much for who you are and for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And listeners, we know you might have more questions for the wonderful Edwidge Danticat. And so if you do, send us a message at Salam and Hello on, where are we? We're on TikTok, on Instagram. You can find us, or you can send us an email, lily@salamandhello.com. And until we meet again, peace.
I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on.